this is, I think, going to be hopefully an illuminating session. So Sabrina and I are both physicists, but we are of a different generation. I am 52, she is 26, so she is half my age. 26 years ago, I finished my PhD at Harvard, and she's moving so fast that she is actually no longer a theoretical physicist at Harvard because she's actually finished her PhD and has moved to Princeton.
Yeah.
So if you put all that together, you would realize that when I was finishing my PhD, she was being born. So you're going to get two people, a generation apart, thinking about what it means to recruit talent. And you've been asked, I hope, through Slido, to answer a question about recruiting geniuses. And as you do that, hopefully you put that in, I'm going to start off a little bit. Sabrina, I think you would have been a bit of a precocious child. You learned to fly an airplane at 13, is that right?
I had started flight lessons when I was like 9. They let little kids go in planes, and then I got to fly by myself when I was just turning 14 in Canada. Yeah.
Right, okay, so that's a good start. I first met you in 2012, and the fact that I remember meeting you in 2012 tells the audience something. You were introduced to me by a fellow Nobel Prize winner, Dudley Hirschbach, who was the first Nobel Prize winner I ever met, believe it or not, back in 1990, I think. And you were 19, you were in Lindau. I think you were the youngest person at Lindau, as I recall. And you had just started at MIT studying, wanting to study aerospace engineering, is that right?
So at that time I had already transferred to, or majored in physics, declared that. But when I went to MIT, I definitely was interested in the institute because I was thinking I was going to do aerospace engineering and be part of this private aerospace thing that's still not quite there yet. But I kind of just fell in love with my physics class in the first year freshman requirements and just took it from there.
So 7 years later, we meet again here, very near where we met 7 years ago. You have straight A's at MIT, which I can tell you is not easy to do. You finished a PhD in string theory. And you're going to tell us just a little bit about what your PhD was in just a second. But to an astronomer, string theory is what we would call a dark art. And it's a dark art because it's completely opaque except for to those people who actually do it. So tell us exactly what your thesis was about, to give people a flavor of what you do.
So in practice, even though we all go under this string theory umbrella, normally the actual research is string theory adjacent. So the work that I work on is feeding off of I guess 20 years ago, Juan Maldacena had this conjecture of this duality between a theory of quantum gravity and a theory without gravity that was one dimension lower, and it had this conformal invariance. So now go back to 6 years ago, and a group at Harvard, we were working on, or still are working on, trying to make an analog of that for asymptotically flat spacetime. So we pretend the cosmological constant is 0, sorry.
Or
and
negative,
then we
right?
look, well, 0 for me. The ADS guys were negative, so we're going on, going the, wrong sign. What we wanted to do was essentially try to have this duality between scattering in 4D and two-dimensional conformal field theory, and essentially build up currents in that theory from soft theorems in quantum field theory in 4D.
Okay, so I think the audience has got a sense of what she's doing, okay? Now, it is incredibly challenging. How did you make, let me just start. I noticed that we have someone here from Poland. There's a picture of you on the front page of a Polish magazine. We had, from my perspective, Stephen Hawking talking about some of your work, what you did during your PhD, as single author papers. You're clearly someone who's making a name for themselves in a really hard field. And I cannot emphasize how hard it is to make a name for yourself in string theory. So I guess the question is, do people come up and call you a genius?
Definitely not, who are physicists. I mean, I think the thing is the media tries to latch on to certain labels to, you want to emphasize something is important. So rather than try to explain this like very like intricate and beautiful field, you like pick out people and say that they're cool because it's easier to sell that. Like I think that like I still have to make a name for myself within my field, and it's just interesting that like the stuff that my advisor worked on was something where if you instead of going to infinity, you go to horizons, then you can say something about black hole information maybe. But like that was the idea that Hawking and him had. So like these things, like you can make a story that sounds like this hero story, but really you're just like one of many people working on these stuff. And so like within my field, no one would ever come up to me and be like, oh, you know.
Right, and if someone does call you a genius, what's your reaction?
It's just like, oh no,
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
like I talked to the wrong person.
No one in our field likes being called a
Yeah.
genius. It's a dirty word. So I'm curious to see how people have voted about whether or not you go out to hire geniuses, because you go out and hire geniuses, you're not going to hire her, you're not going to hire me, or anyone like us, because it's a word that it's a word that we are not, I think, comfortable with. And partially it's because the notion of being a genius, I think, is different in 2019. To my mind, a genius is a name for someone who thinks they're smart. It's sort of a self-identified thing. It's for someone who thinks they're smart, and often are, but maybe is particularly difficult to deal with, would be as someone who runs a university. I don't know, is that consistent with your sense of what a genius would be these days?
I think that we tend to look at the work that people do. I mean, like there's like something like genius about different like ideas that people have, but associating a person with it, like we normally, even the best amongst us, like we would never normally use that word because, well, first of all, I mean, like, say someone has done just so much more work, like interesting work than you have, like trying to categorize them as somebody other than you, like they are a genius and you are not, doesn't help anybody because, like, then, like, oh, I'll never do that. So, like, it discourages in a weird way. And then also, nobody would ever have to say they're great if they are doing good work, like, because, like, you acknowledge it. So.
Right. So, but you would agree probably that there are genius moments. So. In your area, if I think Ed Witten, who would be one of, he's sort of the king of string theory, I think is a good reason to think. Yeah. So would you say that he had a genius moment in creating string theory, or a series of genius moments?
I'd say a series, because I mean, like it was still like many people developing string theory, but like so like different results that he's had, yes. But yeah, I mean, and the thing is that I think like at least that. It's interesting to see like what it was that they knew, or like how those ideas originated, because you hope to find inspiration in that. Like, what can I learn now that's maybe slightly different than like just the standard track, so that I can have new insights? Because a lot of times it's just like somehow things were seen differently, and that's really cool. And like, how do you reproduce that?
So just thinking along the track of Ed Witten and what you're trying to do, you've now moved to Princeton. You've been at MIT, you've been at Harvard, you've been at Princeton, and that's sort of the big three for theoretical physics of at least the East Coast of the United States. I'll be careful to my friends down the West Coast of the United States. So you've clearly had sort of a normal upbringing in the Midwest in Chicago, and you've gone, so let's talk about how you've made that transition from something which is, quite frankly, probably more mundane than I do, aerospace engineering, to something which is probably more exalted than what I do, which is string theory. So what did MIT do when you were an undergraduate to help you make what is quite an extraordinary transition?
Yeah. So one thing about aerospace, I mean, like the side of aerospace that I was in when I was just like taking flying lessons is hardly aerospace engineering, and then like putting a kit plane together, right? Like you put the work in, and then you have this like thing you've created out. So you feel like proud of something that you can then use, or like you do something. And then theoretical physics tends to be a bit different from that, in the sense that whether or not like you end up having these like big picture ideas that you're like fortunate to be studying, you're still like just writing papers and stuff like that. So I liked MIT in the sense that they always like like you were always busy, you always had something to do, you always had something to compute. Everything was just like the next step ahead of what you didn't like know yet, that you were like able to climb that ladder. I think that I was fortunate that I was at MIT because, I mean, grad school is also just very different than undergrad. Like you have like this like freedom. You have 6 years. You want to like study this one thing in detail, come up with something new, go, and it's very open-ended. So I think that especially transitioning from like not being a very like a little kid who wanted to be a theoretical physicist, so I didn't like read Feynman lectures or whatnot as before entering undergrad. It was nice to be in a situation where it's like do these things and then like a coach essentially making you better. Yeah.
Right, so it's actually quite, it's more constrained, and then you talk about going to graduate school, and suddenly you're in with a bunch of smart people, you're trying to do something that no one's ever done before. So did you find that harder than undergraduate?
I think it's harder in a different way. So like MIT, I was always like pressured, right? And so it can be hard, but like, you can rise to the occasion, or what I'm sure like a lot of people can if they choose to value certain things. Like I did well with grades, and because I cared about that, and other people did cool projects, and that maybe is cooler. Once you get to grad school, you realize like that like you have to do a lot of things that are not going to like reward you in some weird way, but like you know that you need them, and it's difficult, not so much like in the day-to-day, but just like being able to take a step back and know exactly what you need to do, and like have this like not get lost in, oh, I want to learn everything a little bit, or like need to know this thing well, but then I ended up not needing it. So that's what's difficult. I mean, I think it's just because it's an ill-posed problem normally that you have.
So you finished your PhD, you've decided to go to Princeton. I know Princeton is a great place to do theoretical physics. Why did you choose to go to Princeton?
It's for my subfield. Being at Harvard or being in the Princeton area is I like the best places to be around other people working on the same stuff. And I think, or not the exact same stuff, which is good. So it's nice to be like not just near my advisor and the people who've worked with him, so I can like get ideas from other adjacent subfields. So that's kind of why.
So despite writing your own important papers as solo or with a small number of authors, having people around you who you can talk to is still an important part of your career thus far?
It's always, I mean, it's super important to have like, I mean, so if you think about it, like the amount of knowledge that you'd have to really be able to like push up to whatever frontier any field is in is just too much for a single person to really have command over. And also having other people like who can like supplement that or teach you things, and like you can at least like extract what's relevant versus like what are the details, because that person knows something else really well, is just essential to basically making any progress in a very theoretical field.
So you're in that beautiful time, the first 3 or 4 months of your postdoc, everything's happy, you haven't started worrying about your next job, but people, my experience the world over, start getting a little antsy about whether or not they're going to be able to stay in the field and what exactly it is that you're looking for. So are you going to take the first job that's offered to you anywhere in the world under any circumstance?
No, I really want to. I mean, like, so 3 years is so short, and I think that's the funny thing that changed after undergrad is like I spent 3 years in undergrad, and that was like a long time for me, and it's amazing just like how once you are just like in a problem and like thinking about things, and then you need to learn all these other things, like time just flies. So for this first year, I'm trying to pretend that it's in like 3 years is forever, right? And just do good work. And I think you try to tell yourself like, I don't want to be jumping around doing postdoc to postdoc. At some point, you'll think you'll know whether or not what you're doing is going to be significant or interesting enough, like to your field, that you should be there like forever, right? So I'm kind of giving myself a deadline, but.
But what do you think is going to be the characteristics? So let's assume you keep on the way you're going, you keep on making your discoveries. What do you think is going to be? So I'm a vice chancellor. What does ANU have to do to make to get you to come down to Australia and work for us? Tell me what it's going to take.
I think 3 years from now, that's going to be just anything. See that's the thing is like you fall in love with what you're working on, and you want to like keep being able to work on this thing. But and when you're further away from the deadlines, you're like, I have standards, you know, like, or whatever. Like, not standards as far as like any university is great, but like you have certain things you want. Like you want to be near like New York City or something. Like just like you wish you had these things if you could have anything. And then you realize like, oh, I'd rather just be doing this. And then like you'll take literally anything. But
you're likely to be in power, so you're going to have some options.
I don't know.
is
Like you
my
like to
guess.
think you have this power. You have to earn that power if you have any, or like, I don't know. It's such a weird setup. I think it's good that you can like let as many people, or a lot of people, into the PhD programs because, right, you're letting them spend like 6 years of their life studying something they like. But then the weird thing about it is in that process, you realize like it becomes a tunnel vision with like the only thing I could possibly do is be a professor. And then you realize, oh shoot, like all of us who are in grad school getting a PhD want to be professors, and how many professors are they hiring? Like, and then you tell yourself, I'm going to be the one who's at like name some institutions. And I wouldn't take the other ones, but then you see these great people taking the other ones because you realize this is just a shitty job market.
I more or less said that yesterday in different terms, but yes. So, okay, so in the end, do you think you can thrive in your work going to, let's just say, that a university that doesn't do any string theory or theoretical high energy physics? Do you think you can land there and do a great job, or do you think you need to have a different type of environment?
I think that it's getting better. Like I have collaborators who were at Harvard with me and now they're in Europe, and because of Skype and like whatever FaceTime, whatever chat programs you have, you can interact with those people. I think that the structure, like to make, so it's almost like you basically like take advantage of the fact that there are openings at like lots of universities like all over that maybe aren't as centralized, and then you take those positions, you use the funding from that, and then you go to like a lot of workshops and then try to meet collaborators at like Flatiron Institute or some other like maybe Stony Brook. And that model, you can kind of see it working. I think that it's something that's going to improve over time. So you could imagine a situation where it's not a big deal that you're literally isolated, as long as you're not intellectually isolated. But I think that maybe because it's still changing and evolving, like I've still been biased by wishing that I wasn't like alone. I think it'd be very hard to simulate like actually like the whole day having conversations with people in related fields. I think that you can handle it for like the summer, you can go to workshops or you can have collaborators, but making sure those things start and like stay alive would be still rather difficult when you're not near the person.
So would you agree that in your field, as mathematical as it is, that creativity is an important bit, that it's not just grinding through the numbers, but you need to have some sort of creative insight?
I mean, that's the fun part at least. So it's always also kind of ironic that you think that you're going to have this great insight when you're just like reading lots of like, I mean, like the material behind what you didn't know, and it's going to click. I've found that even though it's like, so this is not like, it's not great, but it's great for me when I'm like working on a problem and you're doing these like just the details and you know how to do the computation, then is where you like, that's when you find inspiration for something that you just misunderstood. Oftentimes it's because maybe the computation was straightforward, but actually wasn't. Like, so I would say that the mechanics of doing the problems just makes sure that like enforces the understanding and gives you maybe it like takes your mind off of other distractions so that you can be creative or something like that, but it's not the creativity itself.
So in terms of the environment around you, so what is the environment that you're looking for to be creative?
Coffee. And
coffee, yes?
Open like people who they know enough about something related to what you do to ask questions that make you like second guess yourself a little bit. Like, right, so you want somebody who can like be harder on you a little bit than you would be to yourself, but somehow nice enough that they don't just crush you.
Yep. So it's sort of a highly social collaborative network somehow, and coffee.
Yeah.
I mean, so I'll be honest, at ANU, we're putting coffee cafes and really high quality coffee. I love Switzerland, but they got a long ways to go on coffee compared to Australia.
But the chocolate's good.
The chocolate is superb, I'll give you that. So chocolate is also good as well. So that workplace which allows you to interact with colleagues in a well, in a frank but friendly manner.
Yeah.
Maybe not dissimilar to what we saw in the previous panel. So that's really important, I think, is what you would see.
Yeah.
What about the notion of this uncertainty? So we tend to put someone like you maybe through postdoc 1, postdoc 2, postdoc 3. I promise you, your life tends to get more complicated as you get older, at least in my own experience. Is that something that's is that tension, that meat grinder gonna make you better, or is it gonna make you worse at your job, do you think?
I think that there is something to this, either like not, like I think you actually have to not care. I mean, like saying you don't care isn't the same thing as actually not caring about the fact that there are these deadlines, because I don't. It seems like, I mean, a lot of the people who do great, like the people that you're most impressed with, like when you run into them in the hallway, I feel like they're just only concerned about the problems that they're working on, and not so much like these other details. And that level of focus, I think, is hindered sometimes when you have these deadlines coming up. But like, if you can just recreate like this state of mind where you don't think about that too much, then the work should guide you. And then I think as like when you're a newbie and you haven't like had enough time in the field to really feel that you have already not like made a name for yourself, then you try to imagine that I'm gonna like not have to do 3 postdocs or whatnot. So for you, you also had a similar situation where you thought you were gonna like not.
Yeah, no, so I moved to Australia with a 4-year project and a 3-year job, and ended up not getting my job continued because I finished 4th in the job. So I kept on doing it, thinking I was going to go do something else. And in the end, conveniently, the 3 people in front of me turned the job down, and I got to fight another day. I started that job on the 1st of January, 1998, and I realized the universe was accelerating on the 8th of January, 1998. So it was a very close-run thing for me, if you think about it. Now, the audience, you've got Slido. You can start asking questions as well. So just go on, and happy to take them as we go along. So if I could do one thing for you, or for people like you, think of your cohorts. One thing that the university president or vice chancellor can do to help people at your career stage, what's the one thing we could do?
I think, or promise more jobs, I mean. No, I mean, as far as like literally, like if you could do anything, you had infinite resources. I think that so when I was a grad student, maybe what would have been fun was if like the postdocs, for instance, thought that their chances of getting this permanent position relied more heavily on how much they mentor grad students. Because I feel like the one thing is like when you have great advisors and they're senior and they have so many commitments, and they may be overloaded with students, and the students can't necessarily like just learn like some like small details from them. You often try to find like a network of other grad students studying the same stuff, or postdocs who know the stuff and are willing to take on this grad student. And a lot of that is not very structured necessarily in grad school, because it's up to you to do it. I think that could be improved, and it's hard to say exactly how, but essentially making the like the technical mentoring, like taking some of the burden off of the advisors and having some more structure to that aspect of grad school would help, at least for theorists, like a lot. Because the thing is that you're studying something that's been developed very like in depth for maybe 30 years or so, and has like is disconnected from experiment. So like there's nothing just like surprising that we have to now attack, right? So you have this huge like glacier of knowledge that you're like trying to like outrun, or what, I don't know, whatever. Like you essentially like need help, I think, and I think that system could be improved. What do you think? What would you do? Like, what do you think?
Well,
to
so
make it
I guess what I'm trying to do is provide people like you a block of time for security, where you don't have to worry about the job. So it's really trying to go away from 1 or 2 year contracts, trying to get people to do 3 to 5 year contracts, but also taking a fairly hard line and being honest with people and saying, you know, if you're not in a tenure track job after the first 5 years, maybe it's time, your early enough career, to change directions. And for us to try to create a career structure which is at least tenable for people, where they get very clear signals And they're still beneficial, and they're not, I would say, burning time with a very low probability.
Yeah.
So trying to give people a great time when they're with us, but then very clear signals as early on in their career. So, sort of, you're 26 now,
Yeah.
so by the time you're 30,
Yeah.
you'd have a pretty good clear time. Yes, you're in a tenure track job.
Right.
So that's what I'm trying to do. And to also make sure that when you come, there's no second-class citizens, that when you come, you get the resources you need to do good work. And you don't try to maximize the number of people and make them starve. You actually give them a real healthy environment as best as possible. So I think that is an important feature. So we have our first question, and so I'm going to reward that with asking it. Universities must educate geniuses differently than regular students. So, okay, so we're not going to call you a genius, but did you get a different education than your peers?
When I was in elementary school, I went to a gifted school. I mean, like,
Yeah.
Chicago did this, like, definitely. So I think that there's something about, I mean, I don't think it's accurate, like whatever IQ test they have you take, like you feel special and you're like, I can do anything. And your parents tell you the same thing and you're like, yeah. And I just wish everybody thought that they were a genius to some extent, but then they thought they had to not talk about it so that it's not like over the top. Because there is something about feeling that this is the right thing for you. I think that maybe one thing I would argue is universities should help you find the right major for you, because I think that there are some things that come more naturally to some people than others, and pointing that out, that this is your thing and encouraging that is good. I think that excluding people from something is not good. So definitely I do not think that that type of classification is a healthy thing. But I think that universities should strive to have material for whoever is ready to eat, consume it next. And sometimes it's not because the person is way more intelligent. It's just because they've studied this thing for in elementary school or whatever, in high school, and they come in knowing more, and you have to be ready for that. But doesn't mean that you should say, oh, this person's way better than this other student. It's just this person has 10 years on this student,
So as someone who's very strong in their field, one of the things I talked to you last night about is, are you just going to keep doing string theory, or are you going to branch out? And so this kind of goes to this next question, which is, do universities allow you to branch out enough, or do we just focus you down into one little thing where you become great? How do we manage that from your perspective?
I think that universities sell themselves on being interdisciplinary, right? That's
Well, we sell ourselves,
Yeah,
but
right.
from your perspective, do we seem very interdisciplinary?
How is it? I think that for some stuff it works. I think if everybody tries to do everything, it does not work. I think you can see where there are emerging intersections of field, maybe biophysics, or not for me, but definitely there are some subfields that kind of have had their new day now, and those are interdisciplinary. But I think at some point, once they become full-fledged departments, then they become less interdisciplinary. So I think that I would say that they encourage this open mind, but maybe you need to be specialized enough to then actually have tools that you can apply to another field, rather than starting from the beginning saying you're going to do this thing unless someone else has already shown that connection is fruitful.
All right, so I realize this is a 30-minute session, so we've run out of time. So I think it's worthwhile reflecting, since we had so much philosophy in the previous session, and I'm going to take it back to American philosophy, which I grew up with, and my philosopher is Groucho Marx, who said the one thing that the world is never short of is idiots. And I think one of the roles that, at least for me running a university, is making sure that we bring people of talent, and I think we've talked about that genius is maybe not a term we like to use, but by getting people of diverse range of talents, including people who do string theory, and supporting them, you can create genius moments. And hopefully those genius moments are enough to offset the idiots that seem to perhaps be in abundance more than we would like. So let's thank Sabrina, and thank you.